Hello, I am Michael Howard, a member of Faith United's Love Your Neighbor planning team, and I would like to talk with you about an upcoming opportunity for group study and reflection. But first, some biblical context. In Matthew 22, beginning with verse 34, the Pharisees are once again trying to trap Jesus with a trick question. Listen for the word of God. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Love your neighbor is not one of the 10 commandments. For the most part, the 10 commandments are a list of thou shalt nots. One can be in compliance and presumably win God's favor by just not doing things, not stealing, not murdering, not coveting, not bearing false witness. But here in Matthew, Christ takes us from prohibition to action. He commands us to actually do something, to take affirmative action, to love our neighbor. Standing back passively is not sufficient. If we love someone, we want to know them, to understand them, to support them. Their problems trouble us. Their pain becomes our pain. I confess that, like a majority of white people in this country, I believe that the civil rights movement that I grew up in the 1960s had been largely successful, and that we now live in an equitable society. The murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, the killing of Breonna Taylor, and the widespread anger demonstrated by hundreds of thousands of people made me question my belief. Like most whites, I had previously passed off tragedies like these as the exception. But at what point, I began to wonder, does the exception become the norm? I began to read and study the issues both individually and in the company of others. That led to my involvement with the Love Your Neighbor planning team here at Faith. Many of you have participated in the Love Your Neighbor Walk and Love Your Neighbor 2.0, both facilitated by Pastor Jake. The planning team has decided that a book study should be our next step, and the book we have identified is called The Conversation by Robert Livingston. I first heard Dr. Livingston speak about his book on a webinar sponsored by the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. I was very impressed by his calm, measured approach to this emotional topic. He is not accusatory. He is a social scientist, and he presents peer-reviewed social science research to answer questions and dispel misconceptions. For example, do blacks face discrimination in hiring? The majority of whites don't believe that they do, and many actually think that white job applicants are the ones facing discrimination. Dr. Livingston presents and discusses the research. We can then have a conversation and reach a conclusion. I was also impressed by Dr. Livingston's optimism and his belief that we can make changes to ensure a more equitable society. He lays out specific steps for both individuals and organizations. Not surprisingly, he believes an important tool for reaching equity is conversation. In the introduction to the book, Dr. Livingston says, "Conversation is one of the most powerful ways to build knowledge, awareness, empathy, and to ultimately affect change. Conversation is also a primal way to form bonds, build trust, and create community. For me, it is also a way for us to learn to follow what Christ gave us as the second greatest commandment. He could not have been clearer. Love God, love your neighbor. On those two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." I believe that learning to love our neighbors is at the very core of our discipleship responsibility. We on the Love Your Neighbor planning team hope you will join us for a multi-week Wednesday night book study of The Conversation, beginning March 9th at 6:30, in person or by Zoom. More information will be forthcoming. If you have questions, see Pastor Jake, Kathy, or any member of the planning team. Thank you very much for your time and your attention.